So really the state of sleep is like a mini death. And then even a more fundamental question is, why do we need to sleep? Why is it's so powerful? You cannot escape that. You sleep, why is that? So it's kind of, I think it appears that the soul, the awake state is when the soul and body are in unison and they are active and they're working. But after a while, based on inherent nature or whatever, the soul has to disengage from the body for a period of time.
Welcome to the Quantum Theory Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Syed Jafri. He is a medical oncologist, cancer researcher, and teacher at UT Health Houston. He's written 2 books. First, The 40 Spiritual Rules for the Journey of Life from Al-Quran. Second, God and God of Science. Also, he's produced 2 documentaries. The first on his first book, The 40 Spiritual Rules, and second, more of a historical documentary on the Islamic character Imam Hussein. So very excited to introduce Dr. Jafri. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Of course. So I'd love just to jump in first and just learn a bit more about your origin story. Of course, being a medical oncologist and such a materialist profession and traditional worldview in that side of things, I'd love to learn just kind of your origin of growing up in Pakistan all the way to becoming an oncologist and really where faith and particularly the Islamic faith began taking root in your life and how that's impacted you.
Well, yeah, sure. We can start. So I grew up in Pakistan in a large city called Karachi. It's, it's kind of similar to Houston, huge with maybe 10, 12 million people living there. And the faith initially just came from, family, teachings. Also, I went to medical school in, it's called Aga Khan University. It's one of the top private medical schools in the country, in fact, in the region, and then decided to, come to US for additional training. I knew I wanted to be an oncologist, and US offers the best training programs, no questions about that. They're very structured, very organized, and you have a clear path. And, so I came here, settled in US, and then eventually ended up, staying back, after finishing my training. So the spiritual aspect of things, I can see that it's kind of come from the religion primarily, that, if you follow, religious path, then it comes from that, but also just from regular inquiry and investigation, So if somebody has an inquisitive mind, they want to know about, okay, what's going on, how does the universe come into existence, and was there evolution, and the big question, what is purpose of life? Why do we exist? What happens? Why am I here? Why there's 7 billion people on this planet? What are they doing? What's their big point behind all this? And the other big existential question that people almost always ask, what happens when I die? Is this the end of it? So you start to explore these questions from various perspectives, from science perspective, from philosophy perspective, and from religion/spirituality perspective, and try to make sense of things. And I think really what my conclusion that I've tried reach is that the reality of existence is really one. What we all experience is just one reality, but our perspective and vantage point could be different. So a physicist can look at the cosmos and give their interpretation. Well, that's how things started, and that's how much we can know. And they have their own tools to analyze things. They rely on mathematics and instruments, and then and they try to come with a conclusion. On the other hand, the same universe can be viewed by a philosopher, from Aristotle, Plato, and Avicenna and others, who try to give an explanation of the universe. Why does the universe exist, and what is their vantage point? And then comes in, religion and spirituality, and then they give their perspective. Well, that's why things exist. And so really the difference is not really in their different, interpretation. It's just your different vantage point. That's why you're reading different conclusions. So reality of existence is actually the same. It's just the way you look at it is different, And for the existential questions, I think the best really comes from religion and spirituality, from physics. And yes, you can understand how things are now, but why do they exist? And I think there's not much that data they have they can rely on to answer that question, because their method is different, Whereas philosophy relies more on logic and reasoning, and then they say, okay, well, if this exists, then what was before that? And, sort of a logical conclusion as to why universe exists. And is there a higher power, etc., etc. And then, of course, religion relies more on another form of knowledge, which is called revelation, which is to if there is a higher source and they give you in sort of an intuitive knowledge and you have a sort of a vision and you realize, okay, that's maybe why things are. So the real difference is epistemological, the theory of knowledge. Science relies on empirical evidence. They need to analyze things, and all the religion, philosophy relies more on logic and and rational thinking, whereas spirituality is based on intuitive knowledge. And I think there is really one should be able to blend it, and then there will not really be a conflict. It's just a different vantage.
Awesome. I really appreciate that, and that definitely resonates. I think what would be interesting too is to learn a bit more about, from the perspective of the Quran, and even what I read as well in God and God of Science, of the different types of knowledge, such as we have things, as you mentioned, like revelation, we have direct experimentation and things of that accord. I'd love just to dive in a little bit further about the types of knowledge that we can acquire here.
Yeah, so knowledge is like a metaphysical reality, which exists inherently with existence. So if something exists, there would be knowledge about it as well. Question is, as a human being, as a who has curiosity, how do we acquire knowledge from various things? So the simple way to acquire knowledge, simplest way, is observation. That's how the children learn. So the newborn, how do they learn what's going on? Through their sensory observation. You may notice that child wants to put everything in the mouth. That's the way of analyzing things, like an analyzer. So when they pick up something, they have to put in the mouth to analyze. What is it? Is it something?
Right.
Yeah, so that's they rely on sensation. So tactile sensation, visual. So that's how you learn, and you basically learn about the environment around you. Explore the environment. The other is through communication. For example, somebody sends me an email and I know about something. Or verbal communication, or written communication, or an event is happening, a match is happening, and a game is happening in a stadium. How do I know about it? Because there's a flyer about it. So that's how we learn that something is happening. So communication is the other way. And humans have developed language, which is a wonderful way of transferring knowledge. So with language you can store the body of knowledge. So what one generation learns, they can write it down, develop writing, and then transfer it to the next generation. So the entire body of knowledge keeps increasing. So communication, either verbal or written, is another way of knowledge. The third is really we can call the empirical way, or doing an experiment. For example, what the example I give in the book is that, for example, if scientists are trying to figure out if elephants have kidneys or not. So what is the scientific way of, let's say this is their question, what is the scientific way of doing that? Well, they'll do is they know, let's say there are about 10,000 elephants in the world. They'll take a small sample, let's say 10 elephants. And then, if its ethical body approves it, they'll say, okay, we're going to dissect the animals and see if they have kidneys or not. Or maybe do an MRI scan to see if they have a kidney or not. And if these 10, elephants have kidneys, or let's say 9 out of 10 have kidneys, then we can kind of generalize that, yes, all elephants can have kidneys. So you do an experiment, you get some data, and then you can extrapolate and say, well, that must be true in all, elephants. Now, if a philosopher has the same question, and if they want to know, do elephants have kidneys or not, they can put a rational argument and say that, all elephants are mammals and all mammals have kidneys. So all elephants should have kidneys. So that's a rational way of getting it to the same conclusion, but now you're using a axiom and a logic, rational, to get to that same question that you're trying to answer. Now but there is more to it, So that's where most people operate. So common people, our everyday life, that's where we operate in these things, through communication, through rationality, through empirical evidence, and that's our sort of working knowledge through which we live our lives. But there are more to it things. There's something called intuitive knowledge, something that comes sort of from within. You just kind of know that it is true. It could be a gut feeling. It could be, more. You just have a epiphany. You just all of a sudden an idea comes to you, and then say, well, that's how it is. It is something that's come from within. And it could be random. It could, of course, be wrong. Sometimes you can have a wrong idea about things, but they think there's a method behind it as well. People who engage in, serious spiritual practices, they kind of learn from within. Their knowledge sort of springs from within them, their being, like they kind of make a internal spiritual connection with a higher source of learning, and and they learn. So it could just be, for a simple person, it could be a dream in which they know something, But for a more advanced spiritual practitioners, like yogis or prophets, they can get visions and they can see things which others, ordinary people, cannot do. So that's another way of knowing. To give you an example, often people, let's say, have a dream in which they find out something is true. So they learn something, and then later on in real life, they also found it is to be true. I can quote a personal example, nothing out of ordinary, but what happened is that I was, many years ago, I was doing an experiment in lab. I was a trainee in oncology, and we were trying to experiment on a chemical that was extracted from an herbal supplement to see if it has anti-cancer properties. So we made this solution. We developed this model of mice. When we were giving them cancer, the cancer was growing in these mice. And when we divided them into two groups, one group got the placebo, the other group got the medicine. And then the way we were injecting the medicine was we would draw the medicine in the syringe and then inject in their peritoneum, like in their abdomen. So everybody's abdomen has a lining called peritoneum. So just under the skin of the abdomen. So we'll pick up the animal and inject into the animal, and then see what happens after. So we started the experiment. In the first week when we injected our experimental medicine, pretty much all animals appeared sick, and then eventually they all died from the experimental medicine. And this medicine was supposed to be coming from an herbal supplement, supposed to be safe. It had been studied in other studies as well. And so we were kind of a little surprised as to why are animals dying, Really, this is not supposed to die. Well, the placebo animals are doing okay, or the experimental arm in which we are using this drug from an herbal supplement, everybody is dying. So I was a little surprised as to what's going on. Anyways, I'm a little disappointed as well, that my experiment is not working. And then I remember I was sleeping during that time one day, I think in the afternoon, and I felt that I have a lot of abdominal pain, a lot of belly pain during sleep. And kind of that woke me up from that my stomach is hurting and I have a belly pain, and that kind of woke me up. And afterwards, I started thinking, as kind of correlated it with my experiment, that perhaps what's happening is that the chemical that we're injecting is causing what's called chemical peritonitis. It's causing inflammation in the lining, because that lining peritoneum is kind of sensitive, and if you inject it, it can get inflamed, and that chemical peritonitis is probably what's causing animals to become sick and die. So all we did was we just changed the location of the injection. We started injecting into the skin rather than into the peritoneum of the abdominal lining. So rather than lifting the animal and turning them over and injecting into their belly, we started injecting in their back where there is skin, And the animals did fine, and the drug showed that it's working for the cancer, So that's sort of a simple example of intuitive knowledge in which I really could not figure out why it was happening, But in that dream, I kind of had the feeling that something is not right with my belly, and my belly is sort of hurting. And that kind of started that epiphany, and that maybe that's what's happening with the animals as well, that when I inject, it's causing that peritonitis because, I had a medical background, so I could, correlate with these two things, and then behold, it was true. When we injected into the skin, the animals did fine, and the experiment was successful. So that's an example of intuitive knowledge. That's something simple that I think many people can relate to. That sometimes you have that extra sort of source of knowledge. You don't know where it's coming from, but it's true. So that's, I think, but there's a method behind it as well. Those who do advanced spiritual practices and those who take this matter seriously, they through sort of method of self-purification, they can actually get a lot more knowledge. They kind of have a clear understanding of what reality of existence is. So I think that's something that people need to appreciate. And building on this is what we call, from Islamic philosophy perspective, the revelation, or there's a term called wahi, that, for example, what the mystics know, or what the Bible has in it, or what the Quran has it, that individuals, what we call prophets or spiritual leaders, they get direct knowledge from a higher source of knowledge. So when they describe something, as if they are seeing the reality. So that's like the truest or the highest form of knowledge. But of course, you have to correlate with the reality of how you observe the world, and make sure it makes sense to you. But that's not just coming from nowhere. There is a source behind it, and that is given to those individuals, or those individuals can acquire if they have a particular spiritual path or spiritual status. Then you can have that sort of direct knowledge, or intuitive knowledge, in which sometimes you can just tell what it is, without necessarily through an analysis or through an experiment. You just kind of just know that that's what it is.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. And it makes so much sense. And I think that segues really into the idea of, realities outside of the material. And I think today, especially, we are so stuck in our rational mind that we have somewhat supplanted the need for God or some type of creative force for the filling in with reason and rationality and being able to, find, supposed morality, as you state in your book, even though it's really pseudo morality, because ultimately, what is the point of virtue and doing good if there is ultimately no end destination for those actions? Why help a later generation if all that matters is survival of the fittest and you cease to exist after this lifetime? Why even do that other than it just being more of a virtue signal? But I think in the book, you're certainly spot on in the sense that whether they know it or not, or whether we know it or not, our intrinsic goal is the perfection of our soul. It's to the evolution of our soul through the acquisition of knowledge and through, all sorts of, growth within this lifetime to lead to that next outcome and to that, hereafter or whatever, might be following. So I'd love for you to kind of touch on really the difference between, the material realities and the metaphysical realities, and also how important it is to be implementing that into our life and really adopting a worldview that isn't just so stuck in the material, if you will.
Yeah, I think there is a limitation to material explanation of the universe. There's an inherent limitation in this because it does not, in the end, add up. It does not answer all our questions. And people kind of intuitively know that there's more to it. That's why there's kind of a reception within general people about spirituality and about religion. Because they know there's more to it than what just the eye sees. Coming to your earlier point about the perfection, that why we why we're seeking perfection. It's just also there's a pattern in what people seek, irrespective of who you are, man, woman, which culture you grow up, or which religion you follow, or whether you're a scientist or not. There's an inherent design in what we are seeking. We all want to gain knowledge. Nobody likes ignorance. We all want to be strong and powerful. Nobody wants to be weak. Again, wealth is also a way of getting strong. Like you get more power, you can do things. That's why people want to be wealthy and not dependent on the others. The same way we all love beauty. Nobody wants to be ugly or seek ugliness. Everybody wants goodness. Everybody wants justice. So there is an inherent design within us to seek certain attributes or values and the perfection of that. So when you get some beautiful object, then you want to get an even better than that. So when you gain a certain amount of knowledge, it's not that your thirst goes away. In fact, you become even more thirsty. Now you want to get even more knowledge.
Right.
So there is an inherent design within us to seek perfection of these attributes. And that in itself tells us that maybe there is more perfection. There is a source of perfection which is manifesting everywhere in the universe, And that's what ultimately we all are seeking, So we may go after an object of that attribute, like a powerful position. You want to be, counselor of your community, and then but once you have reached that, then you want to be congressman, and then you want to be a senator, and you want so
right.
There's no limit to it, So you want to build up on, because you have an inherent desire to be powerful, to have been in powerful position. Same with goodness and wealth. So that tells us that there's really what we are seeking is a higher source of perfection, and that's what religions describe as God. That's the ultimate reality of existence. That's inherently. So even if we completely say, well, we are atheists, there's no God, but inherently that's exactly what you're doing. You're not doing anything else. You're also trying to do the same thing. So you cannot escape that design. Because that's how you're designed. So those who acknowledge the existence of God do it sort of more consciously. That's what we're trying to do. Whereas those who deny the existence, well, you're still doing the same thing, but in a different way. Anyway, so now coming to the other thing, that is there more to physical world, then is there a metaphysical reality to existence or also or not? I think the evidence is mounting towards that you cannot ignore that. For example, if you just even look at the structure of the physical universe, what the cosmologists tell us, that all the stars and the galaxies and and the supernova, etc., they make up of what's called 5% of the universe, material universe.
Right.
About 25% is what's called dark matter, and 65% of what's called dark energy, which, by the way, have not been detected. It's just theorized that they should be there. Otherwise, you cannot explain why the galaxies are held together, because there's not enough mass. If you just look at the stars, there's not enough mass for them to hold them together. There must be some other source of matter in the galaxy sphere that keeps the galaxy together. And the explanation for that is dark matter, that is more matter, but it does not emit light. So it appears that what we observe is actually a tiny fraction of what's out there, even just from material perspective. But also, when we look at the religious sources and the spiritual texts, they talk about a larger metaphysical reality, that there is more to life than what we see. Especially from, let's say, from Islamic cosmology perspective, the explanation is that really there are not one universes but multiverses. There are different universes, and physical aspect of reality is just one of the planes of existence. And then there are higher planes or higher dimensions or different dimensions of existence in which a person can go, and things exist. So the way I see is, what we're seeing is the material world is just a interface of a much larger metaphysical reality. We are just observing one aspect of things, but there are other things. There's a famous quote from one of our spiritual teachers, masters, Imam Ali, that people are sleeping and they would wake up after their death. So as you go through the life, you are actually in a sleep mode, because you don't have the full big picture. But only when you sort of die that I think the way of saying is, the one interpretation of this is that your consciousness is limited, because sleep is a limited consciousness, right? And awake state is a higher consciousness. So in the same way, in the entire human life, even in our awake state, our actually consciousness is still limited. And when you die, your level of consciousness rises much more, and then you start seeing things that you otherwise would not be seeing. And also from a medical perspective, I can say that there's this pure biophysical model of medicine, that there is only physical body, and that's to it. You're made up of molecules and atoms. But even if you go just through quantum physics, at the very base is what's called quantum field, which carries energy, and then within that energy, there is some vibrations, and those vibrations create the subatomic particles, and rest of the material world is just made of that. So in the end, it's quantum field or energy. So that this material experience is also very sort of fragile. It's very temporary. It does not appear real to it. Because if it's coming from fluctuations of these these energy fields, it can easily change as well. It does not appear like it's something inherent in existence. And one of the quotes from Quran about the life of this world is that the life of this world is nothing but enjoyment of a delusion. That what you're experiencing is really a delusion. It's like you can call like a matrix. Your environment which you're experiencing a reality, but there's more to it. This is not it. This is like a mirage. That you're living in. And then once there's this, question is, what is beyond quantum fields? So if you take away the quantum fields, what is beyond that? Or what is the source of quantum fields? So there has to be another layer of existence. So you can say the metaphysical existence is another layer of existence. Our search gets us to quantum fields. And what is beyond quantum fields, or what exists on the other side, is we don't know. So why are we saying that this is where the reality ends? Because for a thing to exist, it does not necessarily have to be perceivable by us. Something can exist beyond our perception. So what we perceive and what we can detect through our instruments should not necessarily. However, why are we concluding that only those things can exist that we can perceive and that we can detect? Can things exist which we don't perceive and don't? Of course, because we have limited, perception and understanding. Reality is far bigger than that. And then, so coming back to biospiritual model, that the do we have a human soul or not? I think that perhaps is the biggest inquiry, a biggest question of human civilization, that do we really have a soul? Now, other older civilizations have had solved that, that right from the time of Mesopotamia, and then, and then the Plato and the Greek philosophers and the Islamic philosophy, they said that there is soul, but kind of now after Enlightenment, we have kind of given away, and then there is no soul, But previous,
Right.
a lot of civilization culture says, well, there has to be more to, human life. There is a soul. But coming back to modern medicine, that we describe human body just as a physical being, and everything that happens is through that. Now, of course, now this era, we analyze things through empirical methods, and people need to know, okay, what is your empirical evidence? How do you know that human soul exists? Why should I understand it? Yes, some books may describe it, but what is the empirical evidence or tangible things that I can... The challenge that comes is that soul is not necessarily a metaphysical thing. It's not a physical thing. So you cannot do an MRI scan or a PET scan to, look at the soul, because it's not going to show up. But are there other ways of knowing it? So the question is about consciousness. Can there be consciousness beyond that? If there is consciousness beyond that, then you know that there is other, there has to be a soul. There has to be another explanation for this. If your body has died, and why are you still conscious then? The answer for this actually comes from a study published in Lancet Journal in 2001, in which I think they took about 340 or 50 people who had cardiac arrest, and then they were revived, and they got brought back. And then they interviewed them, and about 18% of them reported that they had what's called an out-of-body experience. So this is published in a standard medical journal. Lancet is a well-known, a scientific journal.
Right.
That about 18% of people described that they had an out-of-body experience, in which, while they were supposedly gone and were in cardiac arrest and were being revived, they could see themselves sort of standing outside their body, being revived, or maybe meet their dead relatives, or maybe have a very vivid visual experience that they like. What is very common in these descriptions is that what you experience is far more vivid and appears real than what you experience during sort of normal awake state. So there has a much profound, impactful experience. It's not like a dull dream or a vague dream that you have. It's actually very profound. And there's maybe there's light, or maybe there's a pleasant experience, or maybe there's painful experience. So about 18%, and this was across all cultures, all genders, even children have it. Children who will not necessarily have a understanding of afterlife, or big religious question, but even they can describe that, having that experience. And then they followed these people over a period of about 8 years, and then asked them, how did that experience impact your life? And then those who had this experience were actually profoundly changed their life. That experience was real. That's something that they felt. That near-death experience. But most people can say that. So that's an argument that goes in favor that our consciousness may not necessarily be arriving from this physical body. There could be other source of consciousness, which we can describe as soul, but it's sort of manifesting through our physical body. But most people can say, well, I've not had near-death experience, so why would I believe? But I think I can say that most people have had a spiritual experience. And the reason I say this is that we all fall asleep, and then most of us can see dreams, So in dream state, as such, our eyes are closed, the room is dark, but you can, in that state of consciousness, you can travel, you can meet people, you can have conversation, you can taste food, you can have pain, you can have pleasure, and then you kind of come back. So all while you are, in a way, is gone. So there are explanations of dream that maybe your mind is wandering around, and this is creating them images, but that is a way of knowing that you can have a state of consciousness beyond your physical experience. And there's actually a verse or ayat in Quran which describes that. It says that we take away the soul of those who have died, and also of those who have not died but are in state of sleep. But those who have died, we just keep them with us, whereas those who have not died, we return the soul back to their body. So really, the state of sleep is like a mini death. And then even a more fundamental question is, why do we need to sleep? Why is it's so powerful? You cannot escape that.
Right.
You sleep. So why is that? So it's kind of, I think it appears that the soul, the awake state is when the soul and body are in unison and they are active and they're working. But after a while, based on inherent nature or whatever, the soul has to disengage from the body for a period of time, for recharging the body or recharging the soul, whatever the bigger question may be. But that's a state in which this disengagement, that's why a level of consciousness decreases. We sort of slip away from the reality, we're out. And then the soul can experience whatever it needs to experience. And then after a while, it kind of re-engages, and then we're kind of in the awake state. So if you look at a human body who's in awake state, you can tell, well, the soul is engaged with the body. Whereas in a sleep state, what really has happened is kind of soul has disengaged from the body, not completely, because this complete would be death, but partially does disengage. That's why you cannot maintain consciousness. That's why you slip out of consciousness, And so sleep is like a mini death. It's kind of just like death is inevitable. You cannot escape that. In the same way, sleep is, cannot escape that. You have to fall asleep. I can maybe give an interesting anecdote that, well, in 20 years ago, I was an intern, and our shifts used to be very long. We would start at 7 in the morning and finish 1 p.m. next day. So sometimes we would work all night, or maybe hours, sleep for 2 hours or 3 hours, then go back to work. So when we come back at 1 p.m., of course you're tired, you're hungry, and you're sleepy. So so at that time, the drive for sleep is so strong that even if you're hungry and thirsty, you just want to sleep first before doing anything else. You cannot even eat at that stage. So drive for sleep is so strong, it's not compatible with life if you don't sleep. And that's some inherent design that makes you want to, sleep. And I think it's kind of a reminder that this phase of life is a temporary phase. We all have to disengage eventually from this reality. We're kind of engaging in this material reality, but we have to disengage. And sleep is a reminder that it's going to come our way one day,
100%. No, thank you so much. I really just connect I have 100 questions, but so much I want to peer into. I know time is limited, but one of the things that makes me think of when it comes to the nature of the soul and everything that you're describing is, it really kind of gets me back to holographic reality theory and the idea that the whole is contained in the part, kind of back to the idea of the attributes of the soul seeking perfection and on those points. And it's interesting because, through modern science, we're seeing that we are sort of a fractal piece of this broader whole, and it could almost make sense that we have the same attributes locally as the entire universe as a system. And, that's my fascination, is where I feel that science and spirituality are starting to kind of tangle up a little bit and starting to interweave. And, I'm curious as well, as we kind of see from other traditions, like we hear about the Maya, right? The illusion. And as you mentioned as well, from Imam Ali, and even through what we see with quantum physics, right? I remember in the book, in God and God of Science, talking about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and wave particle duality and even 0 point energy. We know when everything is at 0 degrees Kelvin, there still is a field of energy. There is a field of creation, which, on a tangent, I also agree with you that it is fundamentally irrational that creation comes from nothing. Nothing can't give something, right? There has to be something at the foundation to produce the something. And so I'm curious, given that you're definitely on more of the Islamic religion perspective, I know that you are very scientific in nature as well. Do you feel that we can find answers, or at least pointers, to the greater reality that is God through things like understanding observer effect and our actual effect on the physical world and sort of the holographic reality principle and these types of things? Do you think that they have bearing in that spiritual understanding?
Yes, I think this is an area, the convergence of science and spirituality, I think, is a big area of, I think that's actually the next, I would say, the next revolution in human thought that is going to happen. See, if you trace the history of human thought, we had the first we can say the rationality, the philosophy of Greeks or the Mayans or the Mesopotamians or Chinese, so they try to explain the universe through the philosophical argument, and then had a concept of soul and afterlife, and then we had an Islamic civilization that came, and they kind of incorporated revelation and philosophy also, and then moved these things forward. Started basic, algebra. Like for example, algebra comes from an Arabic word, algebra, and so base algorithm. So they started sort of fundamental scientific, concept, and then there came the scientific revolution, which changed the perspective, where we got the empirical evidence going, and then using empirical evidence, you figure out the natural world. Question is, what comes next? What is the big leap in human thought that comes after these various phases? Then I think the bigger leap is going to be that when we start acknowledging that there is more to existence beyond the physical realm of existence, So and then the people who were likely going to oppose this are going to be the rationalists and the scientists. So the scientists who were who were at the cutting edge of understanding during the scientific revolution and were going against reactionary forces may actually become reactionary themselves, because they kind of stop acknowledging that, because they kind of does not fit their framework of how they want to see. There's a paper written in 1987 by a Nobel laureate. His name is Joseph Brian Josephson. So he, I think, won a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1973, and the title of the paper is "Physics and Spirituality: The Next Grand Unification." So that's, I think, and it kind of describes how the reduction is available online if you want to take a look. How the reductionist system, it may not be enough to explain what's there. So what I think it would come gradually, but I think things are moving in that direction, that people would start realizing that that there is more to existence than just the physical world. Now, in terms of medicine, what I can say is that there are pointers towards that direction. There are studies which have shown that, for example, one of the spiritual principles is to have relationship with your family members, to make contacts with people of your next to kin, for your siblings, maintain that relationship. Now, there is a spiritual, for example, statement by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that if somebody maintains their relationship with their siblings, let's say, or with your first degree relatives, it actually helps you live longer. It prolongs your life. On the other hand, if you cut off your relationship, let's say if you stop seeing your brother or your sister, or you had some argument, you say, I'm not going to meet you again, that can actually shorten your lifespan. Now, this is just a spiritual rule that is given. Do we have empirical evidence for this? So there are studies which show this, and in fact, social isolation is as big a risk factor for mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or maybe even more. So it's a bigger risk factor than obesity. Yeah. So if you are isolated and you're not in social contact, it somehow affects your longevity. And I think that's a very powerful rule. So what I think likely the way forward is going to be that people who can kind of agree with both these world of spirituality and world of empirical medicine or empirical sciences, they can take these spiritual rules and then also do a scientific empirical study on this and see if these are true. And then in this way, the path forward would start to open up, that if then you start accepting more spiritual rules, to be as true. Or, the effect of intermittent fasting, and then so fasting is prescribed by most spiritual practices, that you should, fast. It's good for your soul and it's good for your body. And there are studies which show that those who do intermittent fasting can actually reduce their hemoglobin A1C. So those with diabetes, there's a marker called hemoglobin A1C, which sort of measures their blood glucose over a period of time. That marker goes down if you, let's say, fast for 3 days a week. So this combination would come when you start integrating these two things. Now, give me another interesting study which kind of bridges these two worlds. I don't know if you remember this. Back in 1990s, there's a Hollywood star named Christopher Reeves. He used to play Superman, So what happened to him in in 90s, he had an accident. He fell off his horse and fractured his cervical spine, and he was paralyzed for about 10 years. And I think in 2003 or 2004, he passed away, after 10 years of illness. Now, within a year of his death, his wife, who was in early 40s, non-smoker, died of metastatic lung cancer. Now, I was at that time, and I was interested in oncology, and I was trying to figure out, okay, why are these two events related? Why would somebody in early 40s, non-smoker, all of a sudden develop lung cancer, and that's stage 4 lung cancer, and die, within a year? And then kind of something similar happened with one of my classmates in medical school. When we were in third year, his dad passed away from heart attack, all of a sudden, a sudden death. And, and then 2 years later, his mom developed stage 3 lung cancer, and then she passed away as well. Both parents were non-smokers, both were physicians, otherwise healthy. And I kind of always thought that, are these two things linked? What happens to your spouse can affect you and to a point that you develop cancer, not a simple illness, but, cancer. So in 2015, I got an opportunity to do a research study. What we did, it's a case control study in which we asked this simple question: do major stressful life events, do they increase the risk of developing cancer or not? So what we did was we took about 100 lung cancer patients who had been newly diagnosed, and then and we gave them a questionnaire about the major stressful life events. So there's a Holmes and Rahe stress scale which lists all the stressful life events a person can have. So starting the top actually is the death of spouse. The death of spouse is considered the most stressful event in somebody's life. Death of a child or family member, personal illness, retirement, divorce. So there are various, they list all and give them a grade as well. So we took top 10 and say, because it's kind of hard to quantify stress, how much stressful somebody is, but you can quantify the events. Did you have this event or not? It's very clear, yes or no answer. So we asked them to fill out this questionnaire and say, did you have any of these events, in past 5 years or ever in your life? And we asked the same questionnaire to another 200 or so patients who did not have lung cancer and who were matched for their gender and the age and smoking status. So they were smokers on both sides, but one group had lung cancer, the other group did not have lung cancer. And we asked them this questionnaire, did you have that event or not? And then we analyzed the results. So in the lifetime, there was really no difference between the number of stressful events between those who had lung cancer and who did not have lung cancer. But if you restrict it to last 5 years, then those who had lung cancer were twice as more likely to report a major stressful event as compared to those who did not have lung cancer. And this has been, I think, reproduced in head and neck cancer and pancreatic cancer. I've seen some other groups doing it in colon cancer and breast cancer. So it appears that a major stressful life event could actually be a trigger. Question, how does it work in physiological terms? Well, what can happen is because of major stressful events, your immune system can become weak. Your immunity goes down. So let's say if somebody has decades of carcinogen exposure through smoking, they have been smoking, and then and our immune system, one of its job is, besides targeting the viruses and bacteria, is to also take out abnormal cancer cells or pre-cancer cells. So the cancers developing immune system can, remove them from the system. But if you go through an intense periods of stress, your immune system, the T levels can go down, T cell levels function can go down, and that can those cancer cells can really blossom and become, malignant. Now, we don't have biological correlative studies we are doing in the process to explain the mechanism, but I think this does add up. This kind of, at least theoretically, it makes sense that could be the case, that what happens to one partner can actually impact the other partner because your immune system goes down. So it's not uncommon in my practice to see let's say a grandfather who's like the late 70s, early 80s, who has been a smoker all his life and now has stage 4 lung cancer. And, and he's been losing weight. And I said, what happened? Why are you losing weight? He said, well, my wife died last year and I've not been eating properly. So this grandfather has been smoking for decades, for 30, 40 years and did not have cancer. Now he had another event in which the spouse died. And kind of that triggers his immune system in a way that now that immune system that was controlling any malignant cells no longer is sort of as active as it was before, and that could be a reasonable explanation of why he has cancer. Although some people may doubt this, but I think this does physiologically it makes sense that this is plausible and possible that this is how it should be. But I think the more interesting thing is that it tells us that the spiritual concept of connectivity, that how connected we are to each other. We don't realize that when you spend time with some people, or you spend lifetime with them, you are actually connected at some quantum level or spiritual level.
Entangled, would you say?
Yeah, yes, it's like an entangled particles. You're entangled with the other. What happens to one can affect the other. It's kind of same concept of quantum entanglement. What happens to one particle affects the other particle. And then this is and then, for example, when we say we love somebody, you are actually kind of in a way attached to that person. It's not necessarily a physical attachment, but some metaphysical or quantum attachment. That's why breakups are painful. That it hurts. It is painful. Why is it painful? Because you were actually physically somehow attached. There's actually an interesting saying by Prophet Muhammad that when people would be raised in the next life, they would be raised with what they love. So whatever that you love, you would be attached to that. So even if you love a rock, a piece of rock, you kind of would be with you. So that feeling of love is actually an attachment, real attachment, that is hard to separate, and it has manifestations. So what happens to one can affect the other. So I think these are to answer your question, I think, I know it went in a different direction, that's how the science and spirituality can make headways and connections, that you start realizing that certain spiritual principles are actually true, and then you have a way of empirically verifying that. I think that's when the scientists would accept, or the general community, scientific population would accept, or community would accept when you can verify the spiritual principles through doing some empirical
through the intellect.
Yes, through the intellect.
Yes.
So you have to rationalize. So because the human consciousness has evolved that if you just tell me something, I'm not necessarily going to accept it, unless I have some, empirical basis behind this, or a rational way of, explaining this. Because there are a lot of things that are not true are also out there. So you have to separate the true from the untrue, because there are a lot of things that go around and may not be true. So we have to put that into a framework of an empirical way of analyzing it, and that's the skill of this next generation of scientists. Is how do we do that? To answer this, bigger questions.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really respect about Islam, and something that I was learning after being immersed in that book, which again I cannot rave enough about. I think it really was such a beautiful introduction to just the general tenets of Islam, teachings of Prophet Muhammad and other imams like Ali and others as well, who were mega impactful on humanity and still are today. I think just it's so cool that the foundation is reason. And I remember you even citing that the first word ever revealed to Prophet Muhammad was read, if I have that correctly, which is unbelievable, and it's obvious as to why from that point forward, the Muslim world just skyrocketed in their scientific, mathematical, life sciences, astronomical understandings, when the foundation of the belief system is to acquire knowledge and to expand your consciousness. So I think when it comes to reason, I'm curious if you think that it can extend as far as in the world of quantum physics. Do you think that Islam, or even your own personal belief system, allows for an ultimate reality where we sort of are one with God, or we are a fractal piece of it? Because if you think of the holographic reality principle, you kind of think about the nature of reality in that way versus God as a separate entity, and we are kind of a separate soul that's being sort of evaluated and judged from a different perspective of God. Whereas I think perhaps now through quantum entanglement and again, all these other sort of realities we're understanding is we are actually connected to the whole thing. And we're actually a unique representation of the attributes of the whole. We can see things like the Fibonacci sequence from spiral galaxies to flowers, so there's this sort of code that we are encoded with. And I'm curious if you feel that, through thinking of this in sort of a rational lens as well, whether that, we could be a fractal piece of God itself, or are we something that is kind of separate, that is here separately judged and
Yeah.
incarnated, if you will?
So yeah, to answer, start with the first one, yeah, rationality. I think that's what, especially within Islam, I follow what's called Shia school of thought in Islam, and their foundation is really rationality. They say that even for example, you're prescribed these recommendations that you're supposed to fast and pray and give charity, etc. So there's not necessarily a rational reason why you're supposed to do it as beneficial for you, and you can just follow that. But for the bigger concepts or the ideology, is there a God or not? Is there afterlife or not? Is Quran really the word? So there is no, yeah, everybody is supposed to do their independent investigation to reach that conclusion. You cannot just say that I believe there's a God because my dad told me that, and that's what everybody believes, So, you have to come to your own rational conclusion. Then your faith is sort of grounded. Because if it does not come from within, without using your intellect, and if you haven't really learn it in that way, it can disappear as well very quickly. Once you come across some other ideologies, then it would go away, because unless and that's for your own self. You don't have to explain it to others. You have to, the belief really should come from within your own investigation. I think that's what recommended, that you do your own investigation to reach the conclusion. Don't just accept it because somebody told you that, or you heard a sermon on that. That's not going to last. That's going to go away, wash away. So that's one point. The other thing is about the concept of, what is this relationship between this higher source of existence and what you can call creation, everything else besides that. So just to deliberate a little bit about what Islamic philosophical or spiritual concept of God is, that God is like an absolute being, which is kind of like pure existence that exists by itself, and it has no beginning. We cannot have a beginning, because anything that has a beginning has to have a cause. It is in eternal in existence without having any cause. It does not really change. It's absolute in existence. At the same time, is unique one. It's one in the truest sense of the word. Now, it cannot have parts to it. That this part is for vision, this part is for knowledge, this part is for mercy. No, it is whole one in the truest sense of the word, that cannot have a second and cannot have parts or components to it. And that's what makes it unique, absolute being, different from anything else that we experience. Because everything else that we kind of, at least in our immediate experience that we experience, is limited in some way and is made up of components and parts. So the entire universe is made up of different parts, and that's the inherent nature of that, and that tells us that it cannot self-exist, because something which is made up of parts cannot self-exist. It has to be because it depends on the other things to come into being. For example, a car cannot self-exist, because these parts have to be assembled to make something. The same way a galaxy cannot self-exist. You have to have different stars to put it together. So that tells you that by its nature, it is not self-existing. It has to have an outer source for it to come into existence, which is different from, let's say, God, which is truest sense of the word. And the nature of God you cannot know, because our intellect and even imagination cannot reach that. That's our limitation. We cannot reach what is the true nature of God, but the attributes known from God is, we can know, because He has revealed those attributes, like mercy and knowledge and power and beauty. So these are attributes. Now, question is, how does that relate with what else is there? Do other things also exist or not? Of course so there is existence. There's a philosophical concept of gradation of existence. There's the pure existence, and then the level of existence kind of go down till we get to the basic bottom, like material subatomic particles. That's the minimal form of existence. So they also exist, but their level of existence is minimal. So there's a higher grade of existence and then lower grade of existence, and sort of soul and intellect are at a higher level, and the material realities are at a lower level, of existence. So now question is, what is then creation? The Islamic concept of what I've understood is that the material universe is also a manifestation of God. So the terminology that is used is that what you're seeing or experiencing is a manifestation, like a sun and its rays. So the reality is really the sun, and what rays represent are a manifestation. So you cannot imagine a sun ray without a sun. You have to have a sun to have a sun ray. And that ray of sun or the light of sun kind of is manifesting the attributes of the reality, which is the sun. But it is manifesting that. So you can think of the entire universe as a giant mirror, which is reflecting the attributes of God. So anything, for example, for anything for you to understand, it has to have two concepts. Number one, does it exist? And number two, what it actually it is.
Quiddity.
Quiddity. What are these attributes to it? So the very existence of a thing, is also coming from an outside source. So that thing cannot exist without an outside source because that's a dependent existence. And the attribute that thing has are also coming from. So there is inherent what we call poverty in other things, that my existence or existence of a mountain or of a tree or in the entire universe is dependent on something else, and what attributes I have are also dependent on that outside source. So let's say the majesty of a mountain looks majestic, huge, powerful, but is manifesting the grandeur of God, or a beauty of a flower, looks very pretty, want to pick it up and a butterfly, but its existence and the attribute that it is manifesting represent as an higher. Now, these become perfected or sort of most prominent in humanity. Human beings are those who can manifest that divine spark the most. So there's the makeup of human being, as sort of understood through Islamic spiritual perspective, is that there's a divine, what you call ruh or spirit or divine spark that all of us have it in. And then there's a soul or nafs, and then there's a physical body or jism. So there are really three components to it, not necessarily two. There's a divine spark, the divine soul, that is sort of you can say a manifestation of God that is within us, and then there's a metaphysical aspect of what's called soul, which gives us individuality, which makes one different from the other, that our soul, and then we all carry a physical body to manifest that soul. So that's how, and then since humans can have that divine spark that, that manifests most of the God's attributes, that's why we can, humans can, manifest the mercy and the kindness and the justice and knowledge, and rationality. The biggest, I guess, gift to humanity is the rationality. You have rationality. That's why you're different from animals. You can do things that animals cannot do. So that's why we, when we say we see God, or the journey towards God, really God is within us. We don't have to go out there to get to God. It's already within. And so there's a spiritual teacher, Sheikh Fadlallah here. He says just, arrive at what you already are. So you're journeying towards the God, but arrive at where you already are. You just have to realize that you're already at home. Stop paying attention to the other stuff, and then just focus internally, and you're already at home.
Right.
So to answer your question, how does relationship work? Now, it can be, you can say that there are different levels of existence. There is God, and there is world of, let's say, intellects, a world of angels, and world of souls, and then you get to the material world. So there's a different levels of existence, but it can best be, I think, understood through an analogy. And I read in a book, which actually started one of my first, inspirations towards spirituality, is a book called Light Within Me, and it's available on internet. And I think it's compiled by, somebody has compiled them, and it's written by three authors. One is a philosopher from this era called Allama Tabatabai. He was in Iran. There's another person called Murtaza Mutahari. He is also Islamic scholar, written many books. And the third one you may be familiar with, but may be surprised to hear his name, is actually Imam Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution. So he was actually a philosopher and mystic as well, So he gives this example in the book. And so this book is about, spirituality, Islamic spirituality. It has nothing to do with geopolitics. It's just about spirituality. And somebody compiled the three booklets of these. It's a small book, and then put in one format called Light Within Me. So he describes this example as what is the relationship between God and creation. And he says, take the example of a sea and its wave. So the reality is the sea, and the waves are manifestation of the sea, and waves have really no inherent existence without the sea. You cannot imagine a sea wave without a sea. And waves are just coming into existence and then disappearing, and then they're more coming and disappearing. That's how creation is. So reality is God. God is actually the only reality that actually exists. God is the only reality that actually is alive, has the real attributes. And everything else is a manifestation of it, just like a sea wave. So that's, I think, a good way of, at least that's what satisfies me, of way of understanding how that relationship exists between the bigger reality. So in a way, we are all connected to that sea. So we all are different manifestations of that sea,
Right.
at different points. So we are in a way connected to that larger sea, but we each have a unique manifestation. So each, that's also the interesting point, that each one of us, billions of us, is a unique manifestation of God. That's, I mean, the immensity of the creation, that every one of us is unique in our DNA, in our physical appearance, even the voice. Our voice is unique, So that is, I mean, so remarkable that somehow the creation is so, there's no limit to it. So diversified that each one of us is a unique manifestation of God. And, just like God is the first and the last, the very first and the very first and the last. In the same way, each one of us is the very first manifestation of us and the last. There's never going to be, there's never been a Jared Bond before, and there's never going to be a Jared Bond again. You are unique in the history of existence. There's never been a person named like you, with your background, with your attributes, who has ever existed, and there's never going to be another person like you who would ever exist. So each one of us is unique in this journey of of existence.
Wow, that's so powerful, and another reflection of just our sort of fractal nature, a sort of representation of God. The beginning and the end. There's only one of us that ever has or ever will exist, and that's such an unbelievable parallel. One of the things I wanted to ask, based on us talking about sort of us as a ripple of a wave in the ocean, and of course it has no meaning without the ocean. And think of ocean as sort of the field. Do you think that it's possible that there is a conscious morphogenic field that is, because in your book, I resonated with something that I've always thought, which is sort of the lack of experimental proof of macro jumps of species. And it's sort of observational, as you explained. We're kind of taking what we know about microevolution, the obvious empirical facts of, those micro shifts, and sort of applying that on a macro level. Just because we see certain timelines doesn't necessarily mean one came from the other, or that they literally evolved from the same origin of species, but more of different time periods of those species sort of prominence. Now, I'm curious, I've always wondered, is there perhaps the creative force? Because I don't think evolution or some form of evolution disproves God, because I agree what you said in the book, which is what I've always thought, which is that what if that is the creative process of God, is the constant, never-ending, perpetual creation, whether it's a universe down to a species? And do you think it's possible there is sort of a morphogenic field that, as we see in quantum physics, it's sort of in this sort of superposition state, but there is sort of, and if you ever looked into Federico Fagin, the microchip inventor who wrote a book on consciousness called Irreducible, there's a free will behind this field and what he believes and what he is, I think, largely proven. And that's why there's the uncertainty, right? It's not predictable. There is a free will. And I don't know if that's a fingerprint of God or potentially a manifestation of God, but I think that from my feeling is that perhaps we are in this field that guides our bodily systems in our evolution. Like as you talked about earlier, what keeps our molecules together? Why is there even a blueprint of this atom plus this atom plus this atom? They're going to come together and have these new properties, and what is that blueprint and this sort of field that we're in? And could that perhaps be what guides the evolution of a system of a certain being? Because there is a blueprint in this field that is cohering that being into existence. And it kind of has the subtle blueprint for how that can evolve and develop. Does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts on that kind of thought process of a field basis of consciousness?
Yeah. So question is, what is consciousness? Is it only humans who are conscious? are animals also conscious? Are plants also conscious? What about rock? Is a rock also conscious or not? No. So question is, what is the degree of conscience? So again, it comes back to the primary concept from philosophy, which is about existence. And existence is the most basic concept about anything you can have, that it exists. Because you cannot discuss non-existence. Something doesn't exist, cannot exist. So existence is where things start. And things have degrees of existence, and the higher existence have higher consciousness, and the lower existence have lower consciousness. So even, let's say, a pebble or a rock, if it exists, then it should have a degree of consciousness, if it's coming from the same source. Now the degree of consciousness may be variable, but if it exists, then it should have a degree of consciousness. Now this is again a famous statement in Quran, which says that yusabbihu lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ardi, that whatever is in the heavens and the earth praises the God, and you don't understand their praise. So everything in a way is conscious, and have a degree of awareness. So what is consciousness? Just being aware of yourself and your surroundings. That's the simplest way of describing consciousness, that you are aware that you exist and you are aware of your surroundings. Now, how you manifest this depends on your attributes. So if you're a plant, you can grow. If you're an animal, you can walk around, but if you're a human, you can do other things, But if you're a pebble, you just know that you are there, but that's all you can understand, that you have limited understanding, but you know that you exist. Even an ant, So an ant has consciousness, they have qualities, they have, societies that they live in, they make, they wonderful structures, and, they plan, and so you cannot expect that from an unconscious being, that the being does not understand what's going on. Of course, they understand what's going on, and they're operating in their realm of existence. That's why they're doing it. That's their lifespan, maybe a few days, few hours, few minutes, or few months. But so everything is conscious, and it's met. So question is, what brings that consciousness? What is that, makes them conscious? So is it the molecules or the atoms that they're made up of, or is there something else? And that's, I think, where the concept of the soul or the higher levels of existence come, that really the consciousness come from that aspect of existence. And this is you can say a zone or format of manifesting that attributes of a soul, that we live in that zone of existence in which things are made up of matter, and matter is made up of these atomic particles or subatomic particles. So it has to have that form. So form of an ant or a cockroach or a plant, it has to be made up of that material, you can say the basic building block of life in this, is this, you can say, zone of existence, or in this dimension of existence. So it has to have that outer costume, to manifest itself, Otherwise, you cannot perceive it, It has to be able to manifest itself. So I don't know if that answered part of your question. And the question was, how does that evolution kind of happen? So I know if I say this, a lot of people are going to criticize, you're a doctor, you don't believe in evolution. So I'm not saying I don't believe in evolution. Of course, it happens all the time in my clinic, that you give a medicine, people become resistant, so they have evolved. But is there empirical evidence that one thing made from the other? I mean, we basically are lacking that evidence, because things happen over millions of years. So you have to come with a better level of evidence to show that. But if you can maybe repeat part of your question, so maybe
yeah, for sure. And specifically whether consciousness can be a source from a field, and if that field is what guides the abiogenesis or even just the development of a species, is it possible that it's a field guiding that behavior, which is the consciousness, if you will?
Yeah, there is. So the idea is that consciousness, or that biological form that you get, comes from an outer source, and you can call it a field. And what is field? Maybe field is a manifestation of a soul or a spirit or something, that is coming from that, realm of existence or that level of existence. But it is, you have to have two entities put together to make a thing, like a material aspect of reality and a metaphysical aspect of reality. And I think my understanding is it pervades this model of existence, pervades everything, not just human body, but even a plant or an animal, that there are two levels of existence. For example, it maybe is easier to understand in the concept of human body, that there's a concept of human soul as not something which it comes from outside and gets attached to a body, and then you have a sort of a symbiosis of that. There is a concept that explained by Mullah Sadra, who's a 400-year-old philosopher from Iran, very well known in that circle, that the soul is really has an advent from the physical and then becomes more metaphysical. That due to some divine spark, the material being manifests the soul, and now that existence survives as a body-soul unit. There are two things that are held together, but soul is actually something which is manifesting from the body, and then it's maintaining the body. That it has inherent properties of, let's say, growth and movement, and that's why the body grows and moves. And then its rationality comes into, so your human being becomes rational, and you start, because your child is not rational. Eventually, it requires rationality, and so, and the soul continues to mature, and then eventually it has less attention on the physical body. That's why aging starts. That's why you start seeing white hair, and you start decline. Your physical body starts to decline, because now soul is less and less dependent on the body, because it is following its natural path of returning to another realm of existence. And eventually, when it just detaches from the body, that's when death happens, and that's why you see the body starts to disintegrate completely immediately. Soon after death, the body within days and weeks is gone, because it disintegrates. So what was keeping the thing together and functional was that manifestation of the soul on the physical body. Now, tying that to, did that process? Did the evolution process was guided by that? Yeah, of course, if this is how things are, like if there's a biospiritual model of existence, then this process has to be guided. And really, did these things arrive at discrete intervals or evolve from each other? If they evolved from each other, did the soul also evolve? So I don't know the answers to that question. How did that? Why did we have a basic level of organisms, and then a higher level of organisms, and then the bipedal Homo sapiens and Homo erectus? Why did things evolve in a stepwise fashion? And if they evolved in a stepwise fashion, was this process guided? And what is the role of soul in all this? So it appears that we have to have two for it to work. It cannot just be material being manifesting into a next species.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of the concept of subtle bodies. If you're familiar with those traditions as well, that there's, of course, the physical, the mental plane, the astral plane, and there's different sort of layers to our existence and to our energy bodies. And I think it's cool what quantum physics is showing, and particularly Dr. Joe Dispenza's work in doing a lot of research on the energy centers of our bodies and like our toroidal field that is measurable, depending on people's brainwave states or their state of health. So I think we're seeing that we have an existence that's becoming empirical, that extends certainly beyond our body. And one thing I've been very curious to actually ask you from the book is speaking on this sort of abiogenesis, because you mentioned Homo erectus and so on and so forth. I read that you, in regards to Adam, that you think potentially, according to other leading scholars, that he might have been created somewhere else and then brought here, and that just triggers my Anunnaki, type of whole thought process. So I'd love to get a little more insight on that.
Yeah. So the traditions are not very clear on it. This is what I understood. But really, if you take that concept, then all of us are aliens. We're
right.
And then living here. But yeah, it's the story describes in the Quran that kind of similar to the Bible, that Adam and Eve, that they were created, and then when there was a sort of Adam went near a tree and then was not supposed to go near a tree, then was asked to go down to earth. So there was a change in status. So they were in a garden. Not necessarily heaven that we talk about afterlife, but they were in a garden. And then they had a nice life there. But then due to but it was kind of with design, because this was not like necessarily a punishment. They were destined to go there. That's why the earth was created, so that you can grow there and grow your soul and reach your perfection. So it was destined for that. And then they went, and they was asked to go down, and then they say that you have a stay in this earth for a limited period of time and provision. So it appears that either we are coming from a different realm of existence and then now stationed here for a period of time and then we're supposed to return back, or he was created in a zone in which they were at certain conditions but was asked to sort of leave that zone and exist in, like within Earth there was a zone and he was supposed to live there and then was asked to leave that zone and go out to the natural world and explore. So this, I think, I don't know if there's any clear answer to this, but that's what my understanding is. Maybe most likely he was existed in a different zone of existence and why he came here. And I mean, there's some, you can say, correlative answers, like why do we age, like as if we don't belong here, we have to leave, so we spend time, but it's kind of, we're not designed for this place, that's why we age and we die and we have to leave. Or I mean, there's something to it. I don't know the exact answer, what the true answer is, but that's one of the explanations I give, that could be the case, that the Adam, the prototype human being, was in a different zone of existence, or was brought here, to experience this zone of existence. And then there were other traditions that there were other sort of humanoids before the Adam came, so it's not that we can say, well, we have fossils going back, thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. An Adam story doesn't add up, it doesn't go stretch that far, But somebody was asking, one of our imams, that who was before Adam? He said there was another Adam. So there are cycles to it, and we are in one of those cycles. And are the last cycle? Would there be other cycles? I don't know. I think we don't have the complete picture, but there are cycles that things go and start and they stop, and then things go and start and stop. So we are experiencing a limited zone of reality. And our time frame is very short. Actually, there's the Earth is way has much longer history. Billions of years.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. I'm sure, of course, you can't, tell me for a fact what happened, because none of us really know, but that's super insightful. And one thing I was following up on, which is a bit more philosophical on the Adam point, is why do you think when it comes to omniscience and the nature of God is inherently the all-knowing, there is no piece of knowledge that it fundamentally cannot have, as the ultimate existence? So why do you think, or how do you think that God can create an Adam, for example, knowing that they will, bite the apple, quote unquote, have the temptation and screw up, for lack of better words? It's sort of reconciling the all-knowing. Why even do that if you know that that's going to happen in the first place? Like, it's a surprise. What's kind of your thought process and intuition around that?
Yeah, I think maybe the bigger question is about the concept of free will and predestination. Like, if everything is already destined, or do we have any free choice in it? So there are different ways of analyzing this. And then I think from the Adam story, I think they were destined for this zone of existence. So I don't think there's any, because of that, whatever mistake or whatever error that they did, they got here. I think they were destined for that. That was the design, and there was a way of doing it, and maybe that's how it manifested, or it could have manifested in a different way. But the coming to Earth, I think, was kind of destined. It was not something that happened as sort of a punishment, or something that they did. It was something destined. But the bigger question is now, okay, now that we are here, if, for example, God knows somebody is going to commit murder, God already knows that, then why does it let it happen? Why is there no stop to these things? So there is the fact that I know something does not necessarily mean I have to. I want that thing to happen as well. So, for example, if the way of knowing it is that the reason I know what's coming tomorrow is because for me the time doesn't apply. I'm sort of outside the time zone, so I already know that tomorrow this is what's going to happen. So my wavelength of knowledge, or my stretch of knowledge, is not limited by time. Ours is, we are limited by time. We cannot know, or we don't know what happens, going to happen tomorrow. And that's interesting for us. Otherwise, it would be very boring. If you already know what's coming next year.
Not very fun.
Yeah. You already kind of know. There's no motivation to do anything. If you already So it's in our benefit that we don't know. We don't have the full picture. But from God, it's kind of outside that system. It's not really in that system, so it's not limited by that system, I could say. So that's why it has the knowledge of things. So having knowledge of things not necessarily does mean that he also wants that things to happen. What he has done is there is a there's a basic design in which we can operate. So for example, we are bounded by certain limitations. We have to have a day and night. We have to fall asleep. We have to eat. So there are certain framework in which we can operate. We cannot go beyond that framework. For example, we cannot choose who our parents are going to be. That's not part of. Or if I would have an inherent ability or disability, I necessarily don't have that, say in that I would be very sharp or intelligent and have an extraordinary skill of this, versus I have a limitation. I cannot see properly. I cannot walk properly. So those limitations are not necessary. Those fundamental things are not within our control. Those are kind of given to us. Which culture we born into, which family we born into, those are already kind of built in for us. However, that does not mean we don't have any free will. We have a intellect, and we have a way of analyzing things, and we have choices to make. We can either choose to do this or choose to do that. This is because if that wasn't the case, then it doesn't make sense for us to get any reward or punishment or have any spiritual growth or spiritual retardation. Because really, reward and punishment is not necessarily. It's basically what happens to your soul. So if you do something good, your soul should grow and more enlightened, and that's what you experience in the afterlife, that you are a mature soul, you're lived a good life. On the other hand, if a person makes lots of mistakes, they're kind of really damaging themselves, before damaging anybody else, and then they have a more restricted, retarded soul, and it's more animalistic and less human, less sort of, less sublime soul. And then that's what their experience of afterlife would be. So really, the afterlife of concept is how you have developed your soul. So if you have matured your soul, and if you have enlightened it, then your afterlife experience kind of is going to be also pleasant. On the other hand, if you have really not looked after your soul, you have damaged it, you have made a lot of corruption, and that sort of quote unquote sin, the concept of sin, that if you have lied, you cheated, you have been rude to others, so your soul is kind of in that sense. So
right
now so you have choices, and you can make a free will. Because if there was no free will, then it doesn't make it. It appears unfair why somebody is wretched and why somebody is blissful. Because you have to have a free will. Now, but there are limits to it. How much you can do and how much you cannot. So not everything is under our control. So somebody says, I can do whatever I want to. No, you have limitations. You cannot. You cannot. So there's a man again came to Imam Ali. I think you might have read in the book. Then asked.
I love this quote. Yes.
And he said, is it all under my control, or do I have already, everything is already destined for me? He said, lift up your one leg. He said, yeah, I can do that. He said, now lift up your other leg also. Oh, I cannot do that. You cannot lift two legs at the same time. So he said, yeah, it means that you have a degree of control, but there are limitations to it. So in this way, I think the way I describe is, or I understand, is that what choices come to our way may not necessarily be in our control, but what we choose from those choices is under our control. Although there is a dynamic reality that if you make correct choices, then more important good choices open up for you. And if you make wrong choices, then more wrong choices open for you. For example, if somebody drinks and then they start to drive, then they open themselves to these possibilities of hazard to themselves and to the others. And, so because you make that two wrong choices, first of all, you drank and, you have drank yourself, and then you started driving. So you made two wrong choices, and now the possibilities open up for you. Or a person says, no, I'm going to remain sober, or even if I drink, I'm not going to drive. I'm going to, call an Uber or something, or get my friend. So now you have opened another set of choices for yourself. So I think that's I think how free will and predestination works, that you have choices, but you decide which one you want, which way you want to go. And then that can then open up other choices for you. So it's like a very dynamic reality, that is, you're kind of writing your will as you're doing things, but again, within a certain framework, you cannot be everything and at all times and be every place. You're not omnipresent,
right.
Everywhere. So we have a certain framework in which we have to operate, but then within that framework, like for example, our family and our basic tendencies, basic, inclinations. So everybody has a certain inclination, certain interest. Somebody's an artist. That's what they want to do. Somebody's a mathematician. So everybody has a different inclination and interest. So you operate based on that basic programming that you've been done into you. But after that, it's up to you what you make of it.
Awesome. No, I love that. It sounds like it's, as you said, it's an interplay, and it's almost like we're provided sort of the bumper lanes that we get to play in, because we can't just say, I'm going to fly, right? My will is to fly, or as, Imam Ali said, pick up your second foot now. And it's like, well, I can't do that because that defies gravity, right? We have gravity, where I'm going to fall. So there's certain limitations, and perhaps, we are placed in those certain situations of whether it is how we're brought up, whether it is challenges that are thrown our way in our lives to give us that unique experience here on earth to develop our soul in a certain way that's sort of, outlined for us, and we kind of fill it in, with our choices and the subsequent possibilities that follow. So that really resonates with me. One last question here before we wrap up is on a more of a meta level in relation to Islam. If I should say maybe on a personal level, if I might say so myself, one of the main problems I've had, I wouldn't say problems, but bones to pick with traditional mainstream religions is sort of the level of constrictiveness around the belief system, where it's like, well, if you don't adopt this, then everyone else de facto is going to the not good place after this. And I think one of the things, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I read couple of the verses that were in the book, and it was explaining how, Islam acknowledges Jesus, acknowledges Moses, Noah, and it's not this either or conflict. It's more of just as you said, the latest OS. It's the latest, most up-to-date teaching, but it doesn't necessarily nullify everything before. They're from the same lineage. And I just wanted to inquire from someone that's extremely knowledgeable on this am I correct in saying that the people who worship, God in the Christian faith, let's say, if they live with the right intent, not, obviously doing good with the right intent, not for self-aggrandizement, pride, riches, whatever it might be, and they truly do operate towards the higher power and seek the hereafter, and they follow those principles, and they are, seeking the one God. However, they're part of the Christian faith. Am I correct in saying that the Islamic faith still believes that they're judged, righteously based on those acts, or is it you have to be Islam, quote unquote?
Yeah. So I think the answer is that I would say another analogy is to see at what level of what are you working with. So think of, say, somebody has done a high school, so that's what their level of education is. So they should be quizzed about their high school course, So they cannot be given a PhD to solve. You're going to take the same exam as a PhD, in mathematics is going to do. No, I'm done high school mathematics, so quiz me about that. On the other hand, somebody's done college level maths, somebody's done PhD. So everybody would be, this is what my understanding is, would be judged based on what they have done, and what framework they operated in, Cannot ask somebody to questions about why did you not do that when you were not sort of qualified for that. So now, from Islamic perspective, there is a sequence of these revelations which are all to guide the humanity, to their purpose and meaning of life, and then as the humanity's consciousness has evolved, the system, the ideology has evolved, and so the people can reach their perfection the best they can. Now, the expectation, from my understanding, is that people should adopt Islam because that's where humanity conscious, that's where you can have the best chance of developing your soul. Now, a person, let's say, who is not born in that faith and is not, too familiar with it, doesn't feel compatible with it, doesn't feel familiar with it, doesn't necessarily ready to adopt that, But they still want to, be a good person from their perspective and, do things as they think. So I think they make their choice, I have this path of Islam that I can follow that ideology, but at the same time, I don't think so I'm ready for that right now, or maybe that's not I'm compatible with. I would rather follow this other ideology, whichever it could be Christian, it could be Jewish, it could be Buddhist, whatever you want to follow. Then you're that's your choice that you have made. That what you want to do with that, So if you want to, let's say, again, not trying to be in any condescending way, but if you want to operate with Windows 96 or MS-DOS, or that's what you want to work with, that's the features you're going to get, that's the application you'll have. Whereas if you want to say, no, I want to try some other things, then, so I think that's a matter of choice. So I think the problem maybe in my mind, the people who can get into trouble is people who kind of know what is right, but still don't want to adopt that. So let's say if somebody has a clarity in their mind that this is the right ideology or this is the right way I should be following, and they're very clear about that. But there's certain things that are preventing them. For example, my girlfriend doesn't agree with this, or my dad is going to be upset with this, or I don't want to give up alcohol, because that's what So now because of your whatever personal choice, your or personal, let's say, a restriction, you are avoiding something which you think is true. So I think that may be a cause of disadvantage for that person, because now your idea is to follow the truth path. So if something has become clear to you, this is the truth path, but because of your own either bias or any limitations, you don't want to step into that zone, then I think that may be a disadvantage for that person. Because on the other hand, somebody is not clear about it. Let's say they never came across Islam, or they never really understood the ideology, as I said, you cannot be quizzed about something which you don't know. You cannot be answered about something which you have not really understood, or not really dwelled into, or have not found it to be true yet. Then I don't think a person can be answered a question about that. But on the other hand, if somebody has already reached that level of conviction or understanding, or is very clear to them what is the better path, or what is, I think, maybe more suitable for my spiritual growth, but because of their personal limitation or challenge or habit, they decide not to do it, then I think they may be at a level of disadvantage. So the expectation again, is that people should be following Islam because that's the most updated version of that same religion that has been going on. And it's not a different religions coming; it's the same religion which is trying to guide humanity to different ideologies. And this is the up to date, and you should. And of course, there could be understanding. Okay, I understand this part, but these parts I don't understand, or I don't agree with that, or it doesn't make sense to me. And that's inquiry, and that happens to a lot of Muslims as well. That they're already Muslim, but they may not necessarily agree with one thing or the other. And because some things are more at scholarly level and are more sort of on a discussion level, but I think at the basic, operation or basic lifestyle for a Muslim, things are more or less, clear that you're supposed to have this belief in God and afterlife, and then follow a regimen, of prayer and charity and being good to neighbors, and which kind of is common in most religions, not necessarily a different, although it may be more regimented. I think what I like about Islam is that it is very guideline driven. Oncology, we also have guidelines that tell us what to do in this. So Islam is also very guideline driven, that you're supposed to wake up at this time, you're supposed to go to bed at this time, you can eat this, you cannot eat that. So it kind of already lays out for you. You just have to apply it in your life.
Sure. Well, I think the very last question I have is to follow that up here, and we'll wrap up today, is, so if they're all ultimately going after the same God, so that's an interesting kind of point in the sort of line of logic as well. If Islam does acknowledge Jesus and Christianity as valid, and ultimately they're still going after the same ultimate being, which is God, and they're still pointing in that direction, and they have similar virtues of, charity and all these types of things, is it necessarily a disadvantage to be part of, let's say, Christianity or no religion at all? Let's say someone is, I would say even more towards myself, though I very strongly resonate and was impacted by, a lot of the verses that you had within your book from the Quran, that really resonate with me on so many levels. But, I would say that someone like myself who truly does follow that degree of virtue and character and ethic and charity and goodwill and good intention. And I do absolutely believe in a supreme creator being. And I think that they all these, traditions have so much wealth of knowledge and wisdom to apply to the life, and I don't want to make it necessarily me centric, but maybe for the listener, who might be kind of more of that spiritual angle, which I know you wrote about in the book as well, the shift from organized religion to spiritual, but the numbers haven't really gone down for the amount of people who still believe in a God, let's say. So, what's kind of your thought process, on us all kind of pointing to the same supreme being, if you will?
Yeah. I think the label of, for example, I have a label that I'm a Muslim, and you may have a label you're a Christian. Again, this is that we have given ourselves, but we have to see things from God's perspective, who really thinks is Muslim or believer. I think the fundamental the things that I understood from reading Quran is that a person the sort of the afterlife or the life after death is dependent on two things. One is you have to have faith. You have to acknowledge that there's a higher power, and you have to acknowledge that there is an afterlife. I think that's where things start. So which happens, I guess, same in Christianity as well. That you believe in Christians also believe in a higher being or a God, and they also believe in an afterlife. So that's I think the foundation where things start. So if somebody has not reached that level of conviction, then I think they have a different path. So what happens with them? I think God decides what happens with them. But because you're already denying a reality, the biggest reality, which is God, you say, no, I don't believe it. And then you're also denying afterlife. So, I mean, if you're denying afterlife, that, you should really not be expecting anything, there.
Right. Yeah.
He said, I know. So, what's the complaint, You already said there's nothing there. So once you acknowledge that, then I think each community or group have been given an ideology and a path that they're supposed to follow, and how well somebody follows that, I think they should be judged based on that. That's, again, my perspective. But again, I think once for the whole system to work, or again, that my understanding is still that the expectation is that people should lean towards more Islam because that's the most updated ideology. If somebody chooses not to do that and they want to follow another path, but they still believe in God, they still believe in afterlife, they're still doing things morally, they may be, I don't know, raised as a Muslim, that they have the same belief that there's a God and there's afterlife. Yes, they may not have done the 5 prayers, and they may not have done, but Islam has a particular, tenets that somebody has to follow, like the salah, the prayer, and they go for a hajj. So I think without acknowledge, I think maybe the bigger question is, does somebody acknowledge Prophet Muhammad and Quran as valid source of guidance? Is Quran a valid sort of book of guidance? And is Prophet Muhammad the true messenger, or somebody who has been sent by God? If somebody says yes to these questions, then I think in a way, technically, they are already Muslims. If they already acknowledge that Quran is the word of God, or at least it has truth in it, I relate to that this appears true to me. And then Prophet Muhammad, from what I've read about him, appears to be right spiritual person, likely a prophet of God, then in a way you're acknowledging that you're a Muslim. But on the other hand, if somebody says that, no, I don't think so, that Prophet Muhammad was a true prophet, or, he may be a spiritual person, but may not be divinely inspired, or you have that somebody has a different interpretation of his personality or of this book, then technically they cannot be labeled as Muslims, they are not necessarily. So I think that's where the distinction would come. And then based on that and what you do with it, so if you're a Muslim, I think maybe the expectations are higher from that person. So as a Muslim, you should be more spiritual or more mindful, because you have a more, you can say, evolved or complex guideline driven, path, versus, so you should be, have more expectation from you that you do better, whereas if somebody, does not adopt that, they have a different path. So I think that the question of judgment, I want to stay out of that, because it's not my job to judge anybody, because that's God's job, how we judge that, so I don't necessarily want to step into God's zone and say, well, that's how you're going to judge. But I think that's my vantage point or perspective, is that expectation is to follow the Islam, because that's the latest version of the same operating system that's out there. And then if you follow, then you'll see the benefits of that. On the other hand, if somebody chooses not to follow that, then that's their choice that they have made.
Sure. Awesome. Well, I'd love to conclude with one of the verses to just wrap that up that you included in the book relating to this topic. Surely those who profess to believe in Islam and those who follow the Jewish faith, the Christians and the Sabians, whoever of these truly believes in God and the last day and acts righteously shall have their reward with the Lord and shall have nothing to fear, nor shall they grieve.
Yeah, that kind of summarizes that. I say it says the two things. You have to believe in God and you have to believe in afterlife. These are two things. And then you follow a path. So, and then how would you be judged? That's up to God. How would I be judged? Because everybody has to go through the process of, judgment, and then what you knew, and based on that, what you did, So actually having knowledge is not necessarily I mean, it's a good thing, but there's also your responsibility goes up. You say, oh, okay, now
Right.
I'm going to be scrutinized more thoroughly. So,
Right.
but yeah, that I think that summarizes that statement. That belief, the basic, the things where it start is that you have to believe in God and you have to believe in afterlife, and then what path you choose to follow.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Jafri, thank you so much for all of your time and insights today. It's been such a pleasure, and I truly do appreciate you coming on. I'd love just to wrap up by telling our listeners if you have any links, any places you want them to visit. Where can we find you? Where can we learn more? I'm, of course, going to link everything in the bio for the audience, but just a quick second if you want to share.
Yeah, so there is these two books. God and God of Science came in 2018, and it's available on Amazon, and also 40 Spiritual Rules for the Journey of Life from Al Quran is also available on Amazon. For God and God of Science, actually, there's a documentary, 2-hour documentary for the first book, which kind of dwells into the most of the book. It's available on YouTube, I think, on the channel God Science One. And then there are other videos also in that channel. So you can do Google that, and you should be able to find under my name. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can maybe note down my email address. It's S as in Sam, H as in Harry, R as in Robert, and Jafri, Jafri. So SHR Jafri at hotmail.com.
Awesome, Dr. Jafri. Well, thank you so much once again. It was
Thank
such
you
a
very much.
pleasure. And yeah, absolutely. We'll get this published here, and yeah, we'll be in touch soon.
Good luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Jafri. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Quantum Theory Podcast. If you desire to embark on the path of self-mastery, visit quantumtheorypodcast.com to join a like-minded community of purpose seekers committed to personal growth.